As a relentless snowstorm blanketed Port Charles in a deceptively tranquil silence, true danger stirred in the shadows of the Windermere Castle, its Gothic halls echoing with secrets that had lain dormant for far too long. Beneath the weight of falling snow and false calm, a darker storm began to grow within its stone walls, one that would irrevocably alter the course of Josslyn Jack's young life. What was meant to be a routine intelligence-gathering mission assigned by the WSB quickly unraveled into something far more perilous when she came face-to-face with Ross Cullum, an encounter that would become the fulcrum of a deadly conspiracy. Posing as a stranded university student, Josslyn had adopted the guise with precision, calling out Lucas Jones' name in mock desperation and feigning innocence with practiced ease. But from the moment Cullum, under the false identity of Matthew, appeared from the gloom to light candles with calm detachment, an uneasy chill swept through her that no wind could ever match. As the two shared brandy by the flickering fire, each lie Josslyn told was layered with careful intention. She spoke of boredom, of lectures, of meaningless days in Port Charles, a perfectly woven facade. Yet behind Cullum's placid expression was something razor-sharp. His eyes, cold and unreadable, dissected her every word, every twitch, every subtle shift in tone. He wasn't merely listening, he was cataloging her, calculating. Josslyn, though trained, couldn't help but feel the weight of his scrutiny. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but the rules of the espionage demanded that she hold her ground, even as she sensed the floor crumbling from beneath her. From the very moment Josslyn crossed this threshold, Cullum had sensed a misalignment, an energy that didn't belong. No matter how flawlessly she acted the part, her confidence betrayed her. A girl stranded in a snowstorm didn't hold her gaze so firmly, didn't question so casually, didn't hide wariness behind practiced charm. The moment she stepped out of Windermere and into the blizzard, Cullum issued his orders. Within hours, he had uncovered her real identity. The classified WSB files he accessed, believed by Brennan to be secure, confirmed what his instincts had already whispered. Josslyn Jacks wasn't just an ambitious young woman. She was a fledgling spy under the direct command of Jack Brennan, a wild card in a game Cullum could no longer afford to leave untouched. But Cullum didn't see her as merely a threat. He saw potential, a naive pawn he could exploit to perfection. To him, she wasn't just a liability. She was an opportunity wrapped in youth and misplaced loyalty. The very traits that made her vulnerable also made her useful. So Cullum summoned Brennan not for consultation, but to issue commands. There would be no negotiation. Josslyn would be assigned a new mission, infiltration of a hidden biomedical lab rumored to contain sensitive biological data related to a faction opposing WSB interests. But the mission was a ruse. The data didn't matter. What mattered was the trap. Cullum designed the mission to fail intentionally. Every step of the way was laced with misdirection, sabotage, and death. Josslyn was meant to walk in and never come out. The goal wasn't retrieval, it was erasure. A clean elimination of a potential threat wrapped in the illusion of official duty. Brennan, despite his shock, had no choice. Refusal would mean exposure. Cullum's eyes left no room for disobedience. Brennan, who had once mentored Josslyn with something approaching paternal pride, now found himself complicit in her destruction. Powerless against the rising tide, he could only watch as Cullum's chessboard reshaped itself and as Josslyn was moved into position like a sacrificial piece. He didn't need to be told what would happen if he resisted. Cullum had made it clear in every unspoken gesture, obedience or obliteration. So Brennan complied, delivering the mission to Josslyn under the guise of progress, with a tremor in his voice he hoped she wouldn't detect. Josslyn, meanwhile, saw none of it coming. The new assignment felt like an achievement, a mark of trust from Brennan, a chance to prove her evolution from novice to agent. She accepted it with eagerness, packing her gear and preparing for what she believed would be her most meaningful contribution yet. What she didn't see was the pain buried behind Brennan's silence, the way he lingered in the doorway as she zipped up her coat, the silent war waging in his eyes. He watched her movements like a man witnessing his own undoing, haunted by the knowledge that he was sending her to her death. Every survival drill, every late-night briefing, every whispered word of guidance, they all felt tainted now, useless. The irony gnawed at him. He had raised a soldier only to lead her into a slaughter. In that moment, Brennan told himself a bitter truth. If she survived, she would no longer be a recruit. She would be something else entirely. Or she would be gone, another ghost in a ledger full of names no one dared remember. As the snowstorm raged outside, so too did the silent war behind every locked door and encrypted file. Port Charles remained blissfully unaware that one of its own was being handed over to death beneath layers of protocol and betrayal. Josslyn, armed with false intel and hope, stepped into the jaws of an ambush she could not yet see. And behind her, the man who had once protected her now stood alone in the shadows, already mourning a life not yet lost but nearly beyond saving. In Port Charles, the unease began as a whisper in Carly's chest, an echo of instinct too subtle to be rationalized, yet too persistent to ignore. Josslyn hadn't checked in. The absence of a simple message, a call, or even a traceable signal sent ripples through Carly's soul like distant thunder preceding a storm. At first, she tried to dismiss it. Snowstorms delayed everything, and Josslyn was capable, strong, and careful. But this was no ordinary silence. This was a void. A vacuum that screamed louder than any sound. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And the helplessness that followed was perhaps the most agonizing part, because as a mother, Carly knew, not where, not how, but she knew Josslyn was somewhere far from safety, far from home. And perhaps even further from herself. Still, there was little she could do. No concrete evidence to act on, no credible report of her daughter's whereabouts. And so Carly wandered the halls of her home like a ghost, trapped between realities, haunted by dread, anchored by hope. What she couldn't have known was that across town, inside the cold, cavernous shadows of Windermere, a girl much younger than her daughter was standing on the brink of revelation. Charlotte Cassadine, shaken by the recent collapse of trust within her own family, she had begun piecing together fragments of conversations she was never meant to hear. Conversations between Nina and Haston Sissons, Brennan, that hinted at dangerous liaisons and hidden agendas. The words weren't clear, but the implications were. They spoke of manipulation, of secrecy, of something bigger than her, bigger than any one person. And now, Charlotte found herself gravitating toward Danny Morgan, unsure of what to say or how to say it, but burdened by the weight of what she knew. She watched him from a distance, calculating whether she could trust him, if he would listen, or worse, if he would report her. She was just a child in the eyes of those around her, but in that moment she was holding a detonator of truth. If she spoke, the entire framework could collapse. If she remained silent, the darkness would fester. But how does one gather the courage to stand against an enemy that wears the face of a loved one? How does a child reconcile betrayal with blood? While Charlotte trembled in uncertainty, Ross Cullum moved with terrifying precision. The puppet master's strings tightened with each passing hour. His eyes weren't only set on Josslyn anymore. Sonny Corinthos, the titan of Port Charles, had become a greater obstacle, one Cullum deemed too dangerous to ignore. Following his covert meeting with Marco Rios, who openly yearned for a new hierarchy in the criminal underworld, Cullum began to craft a long-term strategy aimed at dismantling Sonny's influence. But in attempting to isolate and eliminate Sonny, Cullum was treading on volatile ground. The underworld was not a chessboard, it was a minefield. And Sonny was not a man easily cornered. The slightest miscalculation, the faintest misstep, and Cullum wouldn't just start a war, he would be consumed by it. And yet Cullum remained undeterred. With each layer of manipulation, he drew closer to igniting a conflict that could engulf all of Port Charles. Sonny was watching, waiting, and beneath his controlled demeanor was a storm ready to explode. But Cullum didn't care. In his mind, the future belonged to those who seized it, not those who protected it. And Josslyn, she was merely collateral. Unaware of the full extent of the plot against her, Josslyn pressed deeper into her mission, believing she was walking the path of progress. She had trained for this, for infiltration, subterfuge, and danger. But nothing in her training had prepared her for betrayal from within. The laboratory she had been instructed to infiltrate was no mere research facility, it was a death trap. A carefully constructed labyrinth of false walls and invisible tripwires. From the moment she crossed the perimeter, the system had identified her not as an agent of WSB, but as a hostile intruder. Every door she opened had been timed. Every camera angle calculated. The operatives she encountered, supposed allies, were in fact fabricated identities, programmed responses. Actors in a grim theater with only one intended ending, her execution. The communication devices she relied on had been rerouted. The code signals she used were being mirrored back to her, distorted and delayed. Yet even as the noose tightened, something within Josslyn stirred. A sixth sense fueled by experience, instinct, and sheer will warned her to stop. To pivot? She paused mid-hallway, heart pounding like a drum, and made a choice that would save her life: to disobey. To trust no signal, no instruction, not even Brennan's. She rerouted herself through a maintenance duct, disabled the tracking mechanism she wore, and emerged into a forgotten sector of the facility, one not included in the blueprints she was given. And there in the stillness she saw them. Shadows moving behind glass, figures watching her. Not Cullum's men, not WSB, Something else. Someone else. Josslyn ducked low, pressed against the wall and listened. She heard whispers through the vents, voices not meant for her, mentioning her name, her file, her arrival. She realized she had been tracked long before the mission began. But more shocking was the realization that these watchers had been observing her movements for longer than she could imagine. They weren't enemies. They weren't allies. They were unknowns. A third faction. Survivors of failed operations, agents gone rogue, ghosts left behind by Brennan and Cullum's machinations, whatever. They had been waiting. Waiting for her. The revelation was staggering. The web was far more tangled than she thought. She wasn't at the center of a single conspiracy. She was a piece caught between rival agendas, each more brutal than the last. And now, surrounded by secrets and hunted by lies, Josslyn had to choose retreat and survive. Or uncover the truth and risk everything. But one thing had become clear: she would never be anyone's pawn again. The girl who had once taken orders without question now stood at the edge of transformation. Her fear was still there, yes, but it had been eclipsed by something far more powerful: resolve. The mission had changed. She wasn't here to steal data. She was here to take back her narrative, even if it killed her.